Hey everybody. It's right at the top of the hour. We already have a great group. I'm going to wait for 30 more seconds and then dive in. In the meanwhile, I think most of you know I'm Brian Portnoy. I am the founder and CEO of Shaping Wealth, and this is Chopping Wealth. This is our monthly conversation with an expert in behavioral science, advice, or anything else that's important for the global human first community. And so, with that, we've had even more people flow in. Oh, and I'll mention, as I think I see many people here I know, the Q&A is open, the chat is open. I'm going to dominate Scott's time because I have literally like 47 questions. But please jump in and we will try to accommodate any of your thoughts and ideas. So, hey, Scott, Rick, welcome.
Brian, thank you so much for having me.
It's really my pleasure. You've written this really, I think, im interesting but also important book called Spendthrifts and Tightwads. Oh, shut. Did I get that? Did I get the right way?
No, it's the other way, but
Okay, so I already screwed up. A book interesting enough for a technical crowd like this, but a book that now that I'm done with it and all that, I'm going to give to my wife because I actually know it's going to produce probably an interesting and somewhat awkward conversation between the two of us. But that's yeah, par for the course. Let's just start off with who you are. Can you just introduce yourself to the community? What's your current role? What's a very short version of your CV?
yeah. So I'm a behavioral scientist, a marketing professor uh, at University of Michigan, the Ross School of Business. Um, yes, do research on spending and saving, both individually and within couples. Um, yeah, did my PhD at Carnegie Mellon in behavioral decision research. Studied with George Lowenstein and did a little postdoc at Wharton, and then came here. And
And it, yeah, and it seems like you're very much part of the B-side mafia that we know and love. Hal Hirschfield, who's on the advisory board of Shaping Wealth, Katie Milkman, Abby Sussman, all friends of Shaping Wealth. Because of my low key obsession with Pittsburgh, my hometown, Steelers training camp started yesterday. Tell us about your decision to become a behavioral scientist. Carnegie Mellon is just a ridiculously good program for that. Why this career? What captured you? It's to occupy your mind with this, and then the follow on will be you got to work with the George Lowenstein. He's a big deal. Maybe doesn't get the headlines of the Kahneman and Tversky, but man, he's up there in terms of like wattage. So tell us about your decision for this career, this passion, and also what did you take away from George?
yeah, I think in undergrad I was an econ major and ended up taking a class on experimental economics because the one I wanted to take was full, and ended up in this. And I just was totally fascinated by studying decisions through a kind of experimental lens. And um, yeah, that led me to Carnegie Mellon. That seemed like the perfect place to play around with those kind of ideas and methods. And um, yeah, the experience with George was quite interesting. I think, and I mean this in a very nice way, but he's about the least predictable person I've ever interacted with. It's hard to know where the Plinko chip is going to land. He's just so full of ideas, um, and certainly he doesn't. There's no kind of status quo bias with him. He's willing to just kind of turn on a dime and try something new. And so it kept me on my toes, and um, it was a real adventure. I got to kind of play a little bit on my own and then go back to him and check in. We didn't like have weekly lab meetings like some people have, for better or worse. So I got to kind of go off on my own and then report back. And so there's a lot of freedom, but also kind of very timely guidance also.
What was the one big, whether it be mindset or thesis or angle from George that you still carry with you through today?
Yeah. Well, I think there is a spirit of debunking that comes with George, and there were just ideas that are popular and just did not feel right. And those are things he likes to pick on. And I think I kind of picked up a little bit of that flavor in my own work. And you probably noticed it in the book, kind of pushing it back against things like, oh, there should be like 100% transparency within couples and things that kind of feel good on the surface, but you want to kind of say, well, hold on, everyone, let's think about it a different way here.
So I want to start our kind of I want to dive in, but I want to start at the end. At the very last or penultimate paragraph of the book, you said, at the end of the day, this is about well-being and specifically financial well-being, because you go to the deepest end of the pool in terms of spending and saving behavior, and that's what we're going to explore. But I wanted to start with that wider aperture of how you think about financial well-being. I mean, I wrote a book where I coined the term funded contentment. That's one version of financial well-being. I think that the advice community, and there's some amazing representatives of that community. There's people here from at least 3 countries. I can tell from the roster, that think about financial well-being in a way that the industry generally didn't 10, let alone 20 years ago. So financial well-being, let's plant a flag on what that has meant to you, maybe in an operational sense as you research and teach in this space.
Yeah. Well, it's not about um just maximizing some number or amount. Um, I think my book kind of, or my perspective, tries to take a balanced approach, kind of seeking some harmony between kind of um, what you have in the bank and kind of the experiences that you can accumulate and the happiness that money can bring you. Um, so it's yeah, I think it's kind of a unique thing where it's not about kind of how to get rich or how to maximize these numbers, but it's really kind of how to live a good life via money. I mean, how you use money is gonna affect your happiness one way or the other. So you might as well think about how to get it right. Um, and there's no avoiding it. So it's just kind of um, yeah, it's all about the balance. That's kind of my approach.
All right, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, the name of the book, and these core ideas. Let's just sort of level set for everybody, and I want to hear it straight from you. Um, you've invested a lot intellectually into these labels. Unpack them for us. What do you mean by tightwad? What do you mean by spendthrift? And also the etymology of spendthrift, which I actually did know before reading your book, but you made me feel a little bit smart because, like, oh yeah, I remember that now. It's a really weird word.
It is.
I always feel like I'm using it in the opposite way that I should. So, but both tightwad and spendthrift, you mean some very specific things. And being a Carnegie Mellon, student at Lowenstein, you've operationalized these in a very granular way. So, to share with us your perspective.
Yes. And yeah, they could mean many things. There's many ways to kind of spend conservatively. There's people who are cheap. There's people who are frugal, who just kind of enjoy saving and just really get a kick about kind of reusing everything they can reuse. Um, but a tightwad is a little different. A true tightwad is someone who might look good on paper. Maybe all their accounts are in order. You might think, based on the numbers, that they would be quite at ease with buying whatever they needed to buy. Um, but a true tightwad experiences a lot of anxiety and distress when thinking about spending money, particularly if it's like optional or luxurious. Um, and that can cause them to not buy things that they kind of at some level recognize that they should. And that can lead to a lot of regret and certainly for them and the people around them who have to live with their decisions. Um, and so it can be kind of a frustrating experience despite looking good on paper.
And you talk about it now. You mentioned in the book, you use the word pain. There's actually almost a, there's a physiological component to it. So a tightwad just isn't cheap. There's something, I don't know if deeper is the right word, technically, but there's a physical manifestation to this, for in terms of interoception. It just doesn't feel right. Can you click for detail on that physiological component and what you've discovered about that?
Yeah. So there had been this idea out there of a pain of paying, just like the feelings of distress might serve as kind of the brakes on the car to kind of slow you down and kind of bring the future into the present rather than, being very careful about, oh, what am I giving up later? You can kind of rely on these feelings to just stop you. Um, and we see this when we have people shop while having their brain scanned with functional MRI. We see that the more distress signal we get in the brain, the less likely they are to click buy a few seconds later. So it does seem to be this kind of physical reality, not just a metaphor. And by all accounts, tightwads seem to be overburdened with this pain of paying. Like it works too well for them. It's kind of overlearned. And so, maybe they developed this in a protective way when things were a little more precarious in their life, when they had to make sure not to overspend. But the problem is when you know, if you come into some money later, you might hope, oh, well, now I can loosen up. But that's just not how it works. Like a lot of people, they cannot take these well-learned reactions and just kind of shake them off when things get better. Um, I quote this character in the book from Love in the Time of Cholera, Uncle Leo. He grew up poor. He worked his way up, became a rich industrialist. Somebody called him rich. He said, no, no, I'm not rich. I'm a poor man with money. Very different thing. And a lot of tightwads have that mentality. I'm a poor person who happens to have money. It's just they can't embrace it fully. They can't accept it as the reality.
So what I want to do before asking you to define spendthrift is to just put a pin in the kind of genetic disposition toward being a tightwad or a spendthrift, because and I always like to bridge the gap to our audience here in terms of advice and the opportunity for behavior change, the impact of financial education and financial literacy, what types of interventions, if any, can make an impact on how we can help others navigate financial decision making. And I, to me, you just set the ground a little bit for, boy, this is hardwired. You didn't choose to be in physical pain when you think about paying for something, which isn't to say that we are necessarily cast in stone. But putting a pin in that. Spendthrift. What the what the hell is that? It's such a confusing word.
It is. It is. I think the original idea of the word is that your generational predecessors had been thrifty and saved up a nice pile of money for you, and then you kind of recklessly go out and spend their saved money, that thrift. You are now throwing caution to the wind. And so yes, it's a very confusing word.
So what are these folks all about?
These folks like me. So yeah, tightwads are kind of driving around with the emergency brake on. Spendthrifts are driving around with someone who has cut the brake lines. We don't have enough pain when thinking about spending money. Um, and yeah, we're very kind of present oriented. And um, you know, we don't just shop for things we need, we shop for things we might need. Um, and so, we'll do like a lot of just in case spending. Um, oh, I might buy this velvet blazer while I'm out shopping for work clothes, because that would be fun for a holiday party. I'm not invited to such a party. Probably won't be, but boy, I'd hate to be without this if I am. And so I want it there kind of just in case. And so I think the spendthrift motto is I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it. Like we just are comfortable when it's ours, and it's there if it's needed. And so, as you can imagine, this approach can also lead to a lot of regret and second guessing. And boy, I wish I would have just passed on that altogether. And so it's not an ideal thing. Um, so both tightwads and spendthrifts can kind of end up kicking themselves afterwards.
And you've referred to your, so I know that, when you write a book, you can't help for it to be a process of self-discovery. And you admitted right up front you're more of a spendthrift than otherwise. Was it blue suede shoes or some sort of Italian driving moccasins that you purchased? Do you want to tell everyone about how those shoes are doing right now?
Yes, well, they're a little dusty, but I was in Chicagoland for a couple weeks on my own, and um, I was kind of interning with an ad agency, and afterwards I would just kind of walk around, and I would go to like Saks Fifth Avenue and other things that we don't have in Ann Arbor, um, and yeah, I stumbled upon these basically blue suede shoes, driving shoes, and I just thought they were so cool and the salesperson, I was talking with them, and I thought, oh, this could be fun for teaching. Just something snazzy, kind of fun for the students to look at. And he said, well, this isn't like for like a fancy occasion. This isn't for like a suit. This is for like, some casual beach wear. Um, and so, that probably should have given me pause. I'm not like the biggest beach person, but I just couldn't resist. I just kind of came up with enough scenarios like, oh, it could be fun to have it. So I bought it. Um, and, I've used it a handful of times. It's definitely not my style, but um, yeah, it's just, as a spendthrift, I'm gifted at kind of talking myself into scenarios where I could use this. And boy, in those scenarios, I wouldn't want to be without it.
And fair for me to assume that from a genetic wiring point of view, you're, sort of, to quote Lady Gaga, you're born this way.
Well, I think that's true to some extent. I think kind of the environment you're raised in um, is big, and what you observe is big, and I think you can think of that as like being born that way. It's just kind of what you land into. I think there are some psychological, cognitive pieces that can lay the groundwork for this kind of stuff. So, like, um, tightwads tend to be more mathematically minded. They are kind of just more money obsessed in general. Um, and I think they have a bigger tendency to kind of ruminate on things. And I think if you have those ingredients, that lends itself to some tightwadism. Um, so yeah, there's no like, oh, this is the tightwad gene, but there are some, you know, personality components and some things you're raised in that can lend itself to a certain path.
What are the kind of demographics of this? Because it seems from your research that a lot of people, I think most, are in the middle. Neither they're neither spendthrift nor tightwad. And so what's the distribution? And in addition, what are there any interesting demographic or generational trends? Let's on the back of that, Monique has asked a really a timely question about housing affordability, and could be a nice place to drop that in, because especially from a Gen Z point of view, younger millennial, this is all the headlines, right? But before we get there, what's the what's the topography of this?
Yes. So over the years, we've developed a questionnaire, a scale, to measure where people are on this dimension. And, based on all of the data we've collected, it seems like around 25% are kind of clearly tightwad, around 25% are clearly spendthrifts, and around 50% are in the middle. These are people we call unconflicted consumers. They don't get a fun name because they're kind of less interesting. They're kind of happy, and um, it's really the extremes that are fascinating. But yeah, in terms of demographics, men are a little more likely to be tightwads than women. It's a small effect, but it's always there. Um, and yeah, tightwads are a little older. We don't know if this is generational or something that happens as you age, but that relationship is also something that's always there, that they're just older on average. Um, so, there's some interesting hints there. They have different college majors among those who go to college, with the tightwads opting in for more mathematical majors. Um, but yeah, so you get these little clues here and there.
So it's a little bit orthogonal, but I'm gonna drop it in because it's Monique and she always has good questions. Let's take spending or the possibility of spending or not spending in the housing context. And she writes, hey, young folks feel helpless now in being able to purchase a home. Has that helplessness contributed to their spending or saving habits? They give up, meaning they shut down from a spending point of view, or they say, well, I'm not going to put down 200 grand for a house, so I may as well just blow that on vacations or other experiences that make me happy. It's a very kind of timely question about how your rubric interacts with like the hot topic for the lower half of the population.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it can. I think kind of hopelessness can lead to kind of a what the hell effect. You certainly see people saying like, for every kind of day that reaches like a new record high temperature, I kind of reduce the amount I'm saving, like, because I'm so uncertain about what kind of future am I leading up to. Um, so yes, I think yeah, if you're feeling hopeless and overwhelmed, um, I don't think that drives a lot of people to say, okay, well, let me just responsibly save as much as I can and try to tamp that down. I think it can unleash some bad habits.
Is your perspective kind of value free in the sense that, I mean, back to it is what it is. There are environmental factors. We're not throwing those out at all, and we'll come back to those. But is it good or bad to be a spendthrift, or good or bad to be a tightwad?
To me, no, I don't have any value judgments for either of them. I think they both have their pluses and minuses. I think, I have this section in the book about in praise of tightwads, because I spell out some problems with being a tightwad, just all the missed opportunities for happiness and, the unnecessary frustrations. But they are kind of helping to protect their future selves and their you know the rest of their family, and that's a good thing. And they're not being chased by creditors, and that's a good thing. These are important things. But yeah, the spendthrifts, they have their pluses and minuses too. They can really get into some big trouble. Um, but I think a balanced approach, if you can take the best of both perspectives, that's kind of where you want to be. And I'm sure we'll get to this soon, but just like I'm a spendthrift married to a tightwad, I feel like we get the best of, um, both perspectives and kind of let one person win when they should win and vice versa. And that's where you want to be at. So there's wisdom, I think, in both the extremes.
Okay, okay. Obviously, we're going to get deep into marriage, money, compatibility, things like that. I am really interested in the kind of environmental elements and the possibility for intervention. So I strongly encourage everyone to purchase and read this book. It's on my shelf. There's no question I will read it again, chapter 3 I thought was really interesting because it was about how to influence yourself and influence others. And while you didn't frame this in terms of financial advice, you've got 25 plus financial advisors on this call looking at you for perspective. And I think a lot of them are thinking, huh, I'm now thinking of Mary or James or Joe or Jane. They seem to fit one of these. And how might I, in terms of driving their financial well-being, the ultimate goal, how might I intervene? Um, when you think about those interventions, those influences, the opportunity for behavior change, you talk about a number of factors: payment salience, reframing. I'm throwing out big words here, but I want you to kind of maybe bring them home. And can you kind of coach the coaches here in terms of how to intervene in a couple? What are a couple or three tactics that you would toss into the mix here for everybody?
Yes. Well, a tightwad can very easily talk themselves into, I can't afford something. And so I think it really helps to get an outside perspective, um, a spouse, an advisor, an informed friend. Um, I even like the New York Times "Am I Rich" calculator, just some outside view on what you might be able to afford, because left to their own devices, they will convince themselves they cannot afford things. Um, I would also say with tightwads, in behavioral science, we often talk about pre-commitment. If you know your future self is going to misbehave, lock in your future self's behavior today so they don't have the chance. That's true for tightwads too. Um, they can use budgeting to help loosen themselves up. You have to earmark and set aside funds for, unplanned or fun or, hedonic purchases in advance. So the money's there waiting for you when you stumble upon these opportunities. Um, and so if you can just kind of gradually set that in your mind, like, okay, I do have this earmarked money set aside, then um, I might actually be able to spend it when the opportunity arises. They can't come up with it on the spot, but if they earmark it in advance, it's there. And that does help to loosen them up. Um, for spendthrifts, out in the world on their own, no one's looking to help them reel it in. They're just looking to pour gas in the fire. And so you really have to be an entrepreneur and take it upon yourself to, um, slow down your spending. And so it's all about putting up kind of psychological speed bumps and, adding friction to the spending process. Um, to kind of give yourself moments to second guess, do I really want this? Do I need it? Can I wait on this? Um, when I was in grad school and had no money, uh, I had to train myself to be a temporary tightwad. And so I would pay with cash whenever I could, and I would feel pain when I took it out of the ATM, and then feel pain again when I would spend it in the store. And so I had these moments of like, you know, pause. Do I really want to get this? Um, and if I couldn't pay with cash, I would pay with debit card so I could, that's a little more painful than spending with credit. And I would get the physical receipt and go home and enter that into Excel and watch my balance fall. Even though it was already in my, just automatically on the bank website, I needed to feel it. And so I was like the dork who was walking around with a pocket full of receipts, but it really did help me kind of know exactly what my status was and really feel each purchase. Um, so yeah, whatever you can do to put up those speed bumps, delete your credit card information from Amazon and other places you shop at, just to give yourself these moments of reflection. Slow yourself down, sleep on it if at all possible, and see if you still want it tomorrow. But it can be done. But boy, it took a lot of work. It wasn't a fun way to live, but it helped me survive.
Hmm. Before, last question before moving on to the relationship piece, the B word, budgets. Uh, what's your? I'll just ask it in a very grand sense. What's your take on budgeting?
Yeah. Um, yes. So again, for tightwads, I love it. earmarking some fun money, basically. I think that's great.
Which, by the way, to me is that's a counterintuitive thing because you'd think that, well, the last thing a tightwad needs is a budget because we think of a budget. But I know, some of the people on this call, I don't know if Mark Newfield's here. I don't think he is, but the framing of a budget as a spending plan,
Hmm.
same thing, but framed differently with a different psychological impact. So a budget for someone who doesn't spend money sounds weird, but a spending plan sounds much different.
Yes. I love the phrase spending plan, especially for tightwads. Um, and, for spendthrifts, I think it can help. Um, there's work showing that if you have like a budget or a plan over a short time period, that really does force you to kind of actually think about opportunity cost and what am I giving up by spending this money. Um, so yeah, I think when people say they budget, I think sometimes they're over reporting because there's so much wiggle room and like what kind of expense is this? How do I categorize it? Some of the budgeting I see is at a very high level, and not real granular. So um, you know, I think it can have its benefits, um, but yeah, within reason.
Marriage and money, broadly, relationships and money. Fascinating research in the book, some of it uh, surprising in terms of who marries who. Talk to us at a high level about what money does to romantic relationships.
Well, I think it's just so unavoidable. Like there's so many like obviously financial choices you have to make as a couple, but even things that aren't really on the surface about money are also about money. Like what kind of sports do the kids play? What kind of neighborhood do we want to live in? Vacations? How do we spend our time? Do we join the gym or like the club or what do we do? And these are all financial choices. And so it's just there's so many opportunities for friction over this. Not to mention the fact that usually spouses have different incomes. Sometimes one spouse doesn't have an income. But even when both are working, they're probably going to have different incomes, and that can be really irritating and can produce a lot of bad feelings. And so, both on the incoming money and the outgoing money, there's just all these opportunities to um, get, irritated with your partner. And indeed, if you look at what divorcees report as, what broke up the marriage, it's like in-laws and money. Those are the big two.
Interesting. Do couples with more financial assets, rich couples, do they have fewer challenges than couples who are just making ends meet?
Yes, a little, but there are plenty of rich couples who argue about how to use their vast amount of resources, and they can be quite miserable still. And, again, income differences. There might be one partner who has a fabulous income, and maybe the other one stays at home, for example, and helps raise children. And um, you see people reporting that even though I live in this mansion, I don't feel rich because my partner isn't big on like sharing their money. It doesn't feel like our money. It feels like I get an allowance or something. And so, um, yeah, I mean, it helps to remove some challenges, sure, but no, you can still be miserable with tons of cash.
So I was really surprised to hear about spendthrifts and tightwads marrying each other. And, I could opposites attract and whatever. But the data, and it's your original data, seems to suggest that those two different types actually come together more frequently than I would have expected. One, as a researcher, was that surprising to you? And two, what's your interpretation of that finding?
Yes. Well, it was surprising me because normally we marry ourselves. Like, um, a Republican is like 6 times more likely to marry a Republican than a Democrat. And you just see this pattern of birds of a feather flock together very repeatedly. Um, but there are certain parts of ourselves that we don't love. And in those cases, when we find someone else who has our same problem, sometimes it's nice to commiserate. But sometimes it is like that person is holding up a mirror to the flaw that you would have loved to just ignore or not focus on. And it can really shine a spotlight on this thing about yourself that is like, I don't want to think about this right now. Like, you see the other person and it can be like, oh, is that what I look like? Is that what I sound like? That is just terrible. Um, and so we think a tightwad and a spendthrift in like the dating phase is kind of fun and interesting and novel. And maybe it's charming, especially if you're the tightwad and you're being wowed by some spendthrift. It's like, I didn't know someone could, use money this way. It's remarkable. Um, and so, yeah, we think that can be good at first. And, you know, but the stakes get higher in a long-term relationship. And so what was kind of fun and interesting at first can kind of become a little irritating later if you don't kind of, talk about it the right way.
I saw it was sort of a headline. I read the first paragraph, so I'm going to pretend as if this is true, but I don't know. Couples over multi-decade relationships tend to begin to look like each other to some extent. Facial expressions, and so forth. How does it go over the course of a long term? We don't even say marriage. We could just say over the course of a long term relationship, romantic partnership. How do these dispositions toward these poles evolve? Do you become more like your partner? Do things actually go the opposite way? What does your data show?
Well, it shows that if you start out really different and you stay really different, you either got a marriage that's full of argument or you've got like a short marriage. And so what we find among the people who do stay together for a while is that they do, you know, take the edges off each other and merge and kind of get a little more like each other over time. I don't think it's real easy to like flip flop and just like go from one extreme to the other, but you can moderate your partner's kind of extreme tendencies. And that's what the best couples do.
So Jim Grace chimes in with a perfectly timed question, exactly where I wanted to go next in terms of joint accounts and complete transparency. Just to channel Jim here, thoughts on transparency and money. He was surprised, as was I, that total transparency in joint accounts might not be the best path for some. Um, Tell us what you've learned, and then extend that into kind of how do we how do we advise couples in early days, longer days to navigate really the nuts and bolts of whose names are on an account and how money is transferred and things like that. This is sort of the little fissures within which true arguments happen.
Absolutely. So, if you had to choose between only a joint account and only separate accounts, I would say go with only joint. We have experimental data with this. We had newlyweds who were separate, and we said, keep it separate or merge into a joint account or do whatever you want. And we'll follow you for 2 years and check in and see, do you still like each other? Are you talking? Glad you got married. And the couples that we kind of prompted to take the plunge into the joint account, they maintain their like newlywed level of happiness. Whereas couples who kept it separate or just did what they want, which was usually keep it separate, they had this normal decline that you typically see with newlyweds. So there are lots of benefits to a joint account. I think it helps to do some psychological money laundering, taking your money and my money and making it into our money. Um, and so I think all incoming money should hit the joint account first. Um, and it helps to reduce scorekeeping. Sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, we have a joint account," and but we get our paychecks kind of individually and then we chip into the joint account. I don't love that. Because again, that can like, oh, I contribute 60%, you contribute 40%. Like that is not good. The more you're scorekeeping in a relationship, the more it's going to grind down the well-being. So I like joint accounts. They're essential for creating a sense of our money. But I think the very best way to do it, especially if you have a tightwad and a spendthrift, is to have a mix of joint and separate accounts. So the joint account is there for the money laundering, but the separate accounts are there so that we can each take some of our money and spend it as we see fit without the other person looking over our shoulder and saying, do you really need that? Should you be spending that much on that thing? Because we're each going to have different habits and passions and interests and hobbies that the other person might not fully understand. Um, and so we might end up arguing, bickering over small things that might not really add up to that much anyway. So, um, there's transparency at a high level. I know how much you're using per week or per month, but the details of how you're using that lump sum, that's available upon request. And hopefully there aren't too many requests. So that's why I call this approach financial translucency instead of transparency, where you just get a impression of what everyone's up to without the details that can be kind of unnecessarily distracting.
Interesting. Financial infidelity is a thing. It can be very disruptive and harmful. It could devastate a relationship. You know, he spent our savings on a boat. She made a major purchase without telling me. Does your research touch on financial infidelity, and how does it sort of intersect with I mean, what I love is some of the granular structural things you're dealing with here because it's so practical, joint account or not joint account. Given the potential, I mean, it's a bit of a left tail event, but when financial infidelity happens, it's a big, big deal. What's your impression of that phenomenon? And then maybe how does it intersect with some of these structural fixes that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, I don't think that account structure can prevent like devastating financial infidelity. Um, it's that's a deeper problem. Like that calls for a different toolkit, like therapy, and if someone's kind of drifting off and into that direction, like I'm not sure account structure can fix that. Um, I will say that I think you hear about this problem of financial infidelity, and there are, yes, some devastating episodes where just the family's ruined by someone doing something secretive, and absolutely. But I do think it's like a little overblown. Like some people consider very minor things that aren't reported to a partner, like, oh, that's financial infidelity. Like, you didn't tell me how much you spent on the gift for your mom for her birthday. That's financial infidelity. Like, I don't care. Just get her gift so she doesn't complain. Like, I don't need to know any more than that. So there are some things that I just don't think need to be kind of aired, and it's okay to just like keep it to yourself. But yeah, I mean, it's just this tension between in psychology, we talk about, do you want to connect with your partner, or do you want to take steps to protect yourself if the relationship goes south? And it's hard to do both at the same time, connect and protect. And so, yes, if things are on thin ice and you're worried about how things are going to go, are we going to last? Then yeah, maybe you need full transparency. But if you are looking to connect and it's generally going okay, then I think it's good to take the more trusting leap of faith path where you kind of say, I'm okay with you spending, a certain amount, and I don't need to know how you spend it. Um, so it's like, what are you trying to maximize here? Like, happiness in the marriage, or like, are you trying to get the probability that your partner does something crazy down to zero with the money? Like it's hard to do both at the same time.
There's a optimization problem in there.
Yes.
You had a, using an American baseball term, tie goes to the runner. You had an interesting point about when couples couples disagree about whether to buy something or not buy something. And stepping back a little bit, when we think about theories of the relationship between money and happiness, I think there's a general finding. There's so many nuances and maybe some exceptions, but money spent on material goods tends to produce at most a very short-term burst of you get a dopamine hit versus purchasing experiences which you can enjoy threefold: the anticipation of the trip with your family, the trip itself, and then the memory of the trip. So I think that's we'll call it received wisdom. You had what I thought was an original point, that when you have a spendthrift and a tightwad who are married to each other, um, that depending on whether you're talking about the purchase of a material good and there's a disagreement versus the purchase of an experience, there's a different path. Can you give amplify that point?
Yes, yes. So, yes, there's going to be tons of disagreements with a tightwad and spendthrift spouse. What I was proposing was, when the disagreement is about something material or physical, like, should we go ahead and get the new car? Our old one's okay, but yeah, maybe we could just upgrade. And there's a disagreement about that. I think it's best to err on the side of whatever the tightwad wants, because of the research that you mentioned. It's just so clear that a lot of material things, are not great at bringing lasting happiness. So I think that is a good place for tightwads to win. But when it comes to something experiential, particularly if it's shared, a family thing, or a couple reconnecting, um, then you kind of let the spendthrift win those arguments. If you're disagreeing about, should we go to the okay place or the super fancy fun place, I think there you want the spendthrift to win, because yes, those experiences, those novel experiences, shared novel experiences, are so important for the reasons you mentioned. Plus, just like learning about each other, seeing each other in new settings. There's only so much you can learn about your spouse and kind of the day to day, oh, who's picking up the kids from soccer and that kind of thing. But getting into these new situations, that's where you can really kind of, you know, get to the learning and the connecting. So yeah, it's not that one or the other should always win. It's just like it depends on kind of what domain we're talking about here.
Yeah. I want to loop back to earlier in the conversation and touch on the advice that financial advisors or counselors give to their client. One thing, and it's our job, my team, we talk to thousands of advisors a year, and probably, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but one of the most prominent messages that we've heard from advisors across 5 continents is that the primary problem with counseling their couples who are in retirement is that they're not spending enough. So, no opinion on whether whether they're both tightwads per se, but the fact is that, they've been acculturated to believe that you save and save. And when you flip from a accumulation to a decumulation mindset, which is a much bigger mindset shift than I think the industry pays heed to, you end up with couples who there's more agreement than disagreement that, well, we've been saving it and now we don't want to spend it. So again, not tightwad per se, but just people who don't want to spend. We wrote a piece that ended up being very popular called Scared to Spend. It was very well received. How would you, this is a very on the ground problem for the advisors on this call. Given your research on spending and saving, how would you counsel people to talk to that older couple about liberating themselves a little bit and spending the money, presuming that the cash flow modeling says you're going to be fine almost no matter what? This is a psychological problem, not a balance sheet problem.
Yeah, right. Well, I think this is kind of like you know, exposure therapy and kind of I don't know if you can talk them into it. I think you just kind of require them to earmark and set aside and pre-commit money to um, fun or seemingly frivolous things and force them to come back with a report that they have spent this in this kind of novel way. Um, like get them to pre-commit to spending a certain amount rather than kind of um, just kind of describing it as okay to do. It's just you have to I'm going to come back next month and tell you how I spent this X dollars on, fun, luxurious, or optional things.
Kind of percolating under the surface here, or maybe sort of looking in from the window, is our friend Hal Hirschfield. Okay, so shout out to Hal. You know, he has pioneered some of the important research on the future self, and basically, when you think forward to who you might be, what is your relationship with that person? Do you like them? Do you not like them? How do you talk to them? How do you engage multiple versions of yourself back and forth through time? I mean, mind bending, super interesting research, all that kind of stuff. It seems like that, and I know your buddy, I met you through Hal, so I know you know him, and I know you know the research extremely well. Um, how does that, how much of what's underlying this tightwad versus spendthrift rubric is basically a future self dynamic where a spendthrift has a different relationship with her future self than the opposite?
I think that is a big part of it, and they just worry about different outcomes for their future self. So, I think tightwads feel connected to their future self, and they're worried about leaving that future version of themselves out in the cold and kind of suffering due to lack of money, and they really care for that future version. And in that sense, their current tightwadism could be seen as an act of generosity towards their future self. And um, so, in that sense, it's kind of noble what tightwads are up to, kind of altruistic in a way. Um, Spendthrifts, I would like to think that they are also concerned about some version of their future self, but instead of worrying that that future self will lack for money, they're worrying about them lacking for having lived a life and having you know experiences and meaningful memories and adventures. And I think they're scared of missing their chance at um, you know joy, happiness. And so that is very scary to a spendthrift. Um, so I think in that sense, they're being nice to that older version too. Um, but yeah, so it's like there's no one right way to do this. I totally get both of those perspectives.
By way of wrapping up, so we only have like 4 minutes left, and I could keep going. But what are the as you sit here now, what are the most interesting, perplexing questions in consumer behavior and financial decision making that make you really want to dig into the next project?
Oh, wow. Um, well, I do take a couple's lens, so I am interested in things like prenuptial agreements. I have a lot of lawyer friends who are very well-meaning and they're big proponents of these, and I totally get that. But again, I go back to the connect versus protect, and um, I think they could be quite damaging to a relationship. I mean, the fact that they're optional is the problem. If it was mandatory and like, well, we have to talk about this, then I think it'd be fine. But the fact that someone has to bring it up, um, you have to do that kind of very delicately. So I'd love to dig in more to what is the experience of negotiating a prenup and living with it and having it hanging over you. And um, yeah. And, I think how couples can get unstuck from a rut, how they can make progress on arguments that they just kind of, go in circles and keep having the same arguments? How can you unstick them? Um, so yeah, this is a little more adventurous, but it's basically I'd like to do a version of, Seinfeld used to have this game show called The Marriage Ref, where they would have like a celebrity panel kind of weigh in on couples' disagreements. It was not a good show, but I think the idea is quite interesting, getting this outside perspective. If someone's unwilling to go to therapy, what if we just ask 100 people? And I'm just wondering if there are ways to get unstuck by getting like a summary of what other people would say about the problem. So I'm looking into how to do that.
Last question from me, and chat's open if anyone wants to throw anything over the transom. The impact of behavioral finance on financial advice. It's why Shaping Wealth exists. It's why there's a big room of folks here listening to your every word. Especially with the book, you're now in the middle of FinTwit, the financial Twitter kind of thoroughfare. How do you think about, and then, big conference season coming up, and we hear, well, what's the number one or number two topic that advisors want to hear about? And the box that gets checked is behavioral finance, in part because we know that ultimately this is humans serving other humans. This is about decision making, but more deeply, this is about relationships and even identity. So as you think about kind of your book tour, literally and figuratively, and engaging with this world, what impact do you think behavioral finance can and should have on the practice of financial advice?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it seems inseparable to me. And, my goal of all this is to make kind of happier couples. And how can I best do that? Well, what plagues couples, you know, arguments and disagreements and tension over money. And so this is just a vehicle to kind of help couples live happier lives. Like if you can do that via advice and suggestions around money, which must be behaviorally informed, to me, I think that's a really high ROI way to do that. So it's, yeah, I mean, you often hear people say like the math of this stuff is kind of pretty clear and understandable, like, oh, compound interest and like, yeah, we can get the math, but yes, it's the how do you get people excited about doing the right thing and talking about it the right way? Like, yes, it all needs to be behavioral.
Rich is a number, wealth is a mindset.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. This was really good. I just just keep going. I can't wait to keep reading what you research and discover. I mean, just at the conceptual level, but also just in the very, very practical level. I love how you wrapped it up by saying at the end of the day, you want to help couples extend and deepen their relationships. And because money is the number one source of conflict, why don't we just tackle that head on? Professor Scott Rick, thank you so much for attending. And hey, to everybody who was here, this was Chopping Wealth on your OCBO platform. We'll see you again real soon.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye, everybody.